The Galactic Council chamber stretched across a space so vast that the far walls disappeared into a soft blue haze. Hundreds of delegates from dozens of worlds sat in their designated sections, each species clustered together in groups that reflected millennia of alliances and rivalries. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime, converting thousands of languages into comprehensible speech for every being present. At the human section, a modest platform near the back of the chamber, Ambassador Daniel Harper sat alone with his hands folded on the desk before him. His face showed nothing, but his jaw was tight. He had been attending these sessions for 5 years now, and each one felt longer than the last. The current speaker was a Vraxian named Tormalik, whose multiple arms gestured dramatically as he outlined a new proposal. The Vraxians were tall insectoid creatures with gleaming carapaces that reflected the chamber's lights. They were also one of the oldest members of the council, and they never let anyone forget it. Tormalik's voice carried across the chamber with practiced authority as he explained why humanity needed new restrictions on their colony expansion. The words were dressed up in diplomatic language about territorial concerns and resource management, but Daniel heard the real message clearly. The council wanted to keep humanity small, contained, and dependent. This was nothing new. For 30 years, ever since Earth had achieved faster-than-light travel and made first contact, humanity had been the junior member at this table. Every request for technology sharing was met with concerns about human maturity. Every trade agreement came with restrictions that applied only to human merchants. Every proposed colony world required twice the approvals that other species needed. The council treated humanity like children who needed constant supervision, and Daniel had spent 5 years swallowing his pride and playing the diplomatic game. He had told himself that patience would pay off, that earning the council's respect was just a matter of time. He had been wrong. The vote began. Daniel watched the display board as species after species approved Tormalik's proposal. The Keltheran delegation, a group of towering beings with crystalline skin, voted yes. The Sendari merchants, usually sympathetic to human causes, abstained. The Felorian collective voted yes. One by one, the votes piled up in favor of the restrictions. Daniel had known this would happen. He had sent messages to Earth Command 3 days ago warning them of the outcome. The response from President Helen Carter had been brief and clear. The time for patience was over. When the final vote was tallied, the proposal passed with 83% approval. Speaker Vexthor, a Keltheran who had led the council for 2 decades, announced the result with obvious satisfaction. His crystalline face reflected light and patterns that other Keltherans could read as expressions. But to Daniel, he just looked smug. The speaker began to move on to the next item on the agenda, something about trade route adjustments in the outer sectors. Daniel reached down and carefully gathered his data tablets into his carrying case. The soft clicks of the tablets snapping into place seemed loud in his ears. He stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. The sound carried. Several nearby delegates glanced his way. Daniel deactivated his translation device with a deliberate motion, and the constant background hum of converted speech vanished from his ears. He could still hear the raw sounds of alien languages, but they meant nothing to him now. He turned toward the exit and began walking. His footsteps echoed on the polished floor. More delegates noticed. The murmur of conversation began to die down. By the time Daniel was halfway to the door, the entire chamber had gone quiet. Even Speaker Vexthor had stopped mid-sentence. Daniel reached the massive doors that led out of the chamber. His hand touched the door control. That was when Vexthor's voice boomed out, amplified by the chamber's speakers. The translation came through the room's general systems, which Daniel's device had not controlled. He heard the words clearly. "Ambassador Harper, you cannot simply leave during session. This is a violation of council protocol." Daniel paused. He did not turn around. He stood there for a moment, his hand still on the door control, and then he spoke loudly enough for his voice to carry across the silent chamber. "We are not leaving the session, Speaker. We are leaving the council, permanently." The doors opened before him, and Daniel walked through without looking back. Behind him, chaos erupted. Delegates began shouting questions. The translation system struggled to keep up with the sudden flood of multiple conversations. Speaker Vexthor was demanding order and calling for Daniel to return. None of it mattered. Daniel Harper walked down the corridor outside the chamber, his footsteps steady and sure. He had just done what no species had ever done in the 4,000-year history of the Galactic Council. He had walked away. Within an hour, the news had spread across Council space. Within 6 hours, it reached Earth. Within 12 hours, President Carter was addressing a joint session of Earth's government. She stood at the podium in Geneva, facing representatives from every nation and colony world humanity had established. Her words were broadcast across every human station and settlement. "We came to the stars seeking partnership," she said. "We found gatekeepers. We offered cooperation. We received condescension. We brought innovation and were treated as primitives. We showed patience and were seen as weak. Today, after 30 years of trying to earn respect we should have been given freely, humanity chooses a different path. We are recalling all our citizens from Council space. We are withdrawing from all treaties and agreements. We are closing our borders to Council ships and cutting all diplomatic ties. This is not done in anger but in clarity. We see now what should have been obvious from the beginning. The Council does not want partners. They want subordinates. Humanity will not be subordinate to anyone." The order went out immediately. Every human ship in Council space received the same message. Return home within 60 days. Every embassy began packing. Every colonist on shared worlds received evacuation schedules. Every merchant was told to settle their accounts and leave. The greatest human exodus in history had begun, and across Council space aliens watched in confusion as their human neighbors began to disappear. Some tried to ask why. Some tried to convince humans to stay, but the decision was made, and humanity was leaving the table for good. Captain Lisa Morgan was 3 months into a deep space survey mission when the encrypted message arrived. She had been standing on the bridge of the UES Defiant, watching her crew chart a nebula that no human had ever studied before, when the communications officer called her over. The message header alone told her everything had changed. Priority Alpha 1 meant orders directly from Earth Command, and those only came during emergencies or war. Lisa entered her command codes and read the message twice to make sure she understood it correctly. All human vessels, stations, and personnel are ordered to withdraw from Council space immediately. Return to Earth or designated human territories within 60 standard days. No exceptions. Lisa looked out at the stars beyond her viewport and felt something shift in her chest. She had joined the Earth Exploration Service because she believed in building bridges between species. She had spent 12 years of her life working alongside alien scientists, learning their ways, sharing human knowledge. Now all of that was ending. She turned to her crew and gave the order. Set course for Earth maximum speed. Her first officer, a young woman named Kate Sullivan, asked the question everyone was thinking. "Captain, what happened?" Lisa handed her the message and watched her read it. When Kate looked up, her eyes were wide. "We are leaving the Council." Kate said it like she could not quite believe the words. Lisa nodded slowly. "Looks that way. Now let us get moving." Across Council space, the same scene played out on hundreds of human ships. Merchant vessels abandoned their trade routes mid-journey, compensating their alien customers and turning homeward. Research teams packed up decades of work and left joint scientific stations. Military ships on patrol duty received coordinates for extraction points. The movement was coordinated with a precision that surprised many Council observers. Humanity had clearly planned for this possibility long before Ambassador Harper walked out of that chamber. Within days, the first ships began arriving at human border stations, and the stories they brought back painted a picture of confusion and growing concern among Council species. On the frontier world of Nova Terra, Governor Patrick Hayes stood in his office looking at the evacuation schedules. Nova Terra was a joint colony, shared between humans and 3 other species. Humans made up 40% of the population, and they had built most of the infrastructure that kept the colony running. Now Patrick had to organize the removal of 12,000 people and somehow keep the colony functioning for those who remained. It was an impossible task, but he had his orders. He called a meeting with the alien governors and explained the situation. The Sendari governor, a merchant named Felthar, asked why humans were leaving. Patrick had no good answer to give. He just said that Earth had made its decision and all humans would respect it. The evacuation began 3 days later. Human families packed their belongings into cargo containers. Engineers trained alien replacements on how to maintain the power grid and water systems. Teachers recorded lessons for the schools that would continue after they left. Amy Richardson, a technician who had lived on Nova Terra for 8 years, spent her last week showing a young Sendari named Kelshaw how to repair the atmospheric processors. Kelsha kept asking why Amy was leaving, and Amy gave her the same answer every time. Because we are tired of being treated like children who need permission to grow up. On her final day, Amy sealed the last cargo container and walked to the transport ship without looking back. She had loved Nova Terra, but she loved humanity's dignity more. Back on Earth, President Helen Carter addressed the planet from the steps of the assembly building. Cameras from every nation broadcast her words to billions of humans across Earth and its colonies. She spoke calmly without anger, explaining the decades of restrictions and condescension that had led to this moment. She talked about the technology embargoes that had slowed human progress, the trade barriers that had limited human prosperity, the constant requirement to justify every action to a council that never trusted humanity's intentions. She said that Earth had tried patience and diplomacy, had played by the rules for 30 years, and had been rewarded with nothing but more restrictions. So now humanity was choosing a different path. We are not declaring war, Carter said. We are not seeking revenge. We are simply deciding that we will stand on our own. We will build our own future without asking permission from those who see us as lesser. The human species came from a world that taught us to adapt and overcome. Now we will show the galaxy what we can accomplish when we are free to reach our full potential. The words resonated across human space. In orbital stations around Earth, workers began constructing new shipyards. On Mars and the lunar colonies, factories shifted production to support Earth's new independence. On distant colony worlds, humans who had never even seen an alien felt a surge of pride in their species. Humanity was done begging for respect. They would earn it through their achievements, or they would do without it entirely. Either way, they would no longer sit at a table where they were not wanted. The 60-day deadline approached. Council observers watched as human presence in their space dwindled day by day. Embassies that had stood for decades were emptied and sealed. Research outposts went dark. Trade stations closed their human sections. On the final day, the last human ship crossed into Earth-controlled space, and Captain Lisa Morgan transmitted a brief message to the nearest Council station. This is Captain Morgan of the UES Defiant. We are the last human vessel in Council territory. We are now departing. Humanity thanks the Council for the opportunity to have participated, but our time at your table has ended. We wish you well. The transmission ended, and the Defiant jumped to faster than light speed, vanishing from Council sensors. In the weeks that followed, Council space felt different. Humans had been everywhere, working in thousands of roles, filling gaps in the economy and society that no one had really noticed until they were gone. Now those gaps became obvious. Trade routes that humans had maintained fell into disuse. Joint projects stalled without human engineers. Diplomatic channels that humans had facilitated between hostile species went silent. The Council had not realized how much they had come to depend on humanity's presence, and now it was too late. The humans were gone, and they had made it clear they were not coming back. 6 months had passed since the last human ship left Council space, and Intelligence Director Kexalan stood before the emergency session with a report that made his hands tremble. He was Vraxian, a species known for their military precision and strategic thinking, but what he had discovered over the past months defied all logical expectations. The Council chamber was less crowded than usual, with only the senior delegates present for this classified briefing. Speaker Vexthor sat in his elevated position, his crystalline face reflecting the dim lights as he waited for Kexlan to begin. The Vraxian cleared his throat and activated the holographic display that showed a map of known space. The human territories were marked in blue, and around them was nothing but empty black space where Council sensors could not penetrate. We have a problem, Kexlan said, and his voice carried the weight of genuine concern. Humanity has not simply withdrawn from Council space. They have vanished completely. The delegates stirred, and several began speaking at once. Bexthor called for silence and gestured for Kexlan to continue. The intelligence director pulled up another display showing trade route data. 6 months ago, human merchant vessels were everywhere in Council space. They carried goods between worlds, facilitated transactions, and maintained supply chains that connected dozens of systems. Now those routes are empty. The merchants who depended on human intermediaries have lost contact with their buyers. The goods that humans transported are piling up in warehouses with no one to move them. But that is not the strangest part. Kexlan changed the display again, this time showing communication intercepts and sensor data. We have tried to monitor human space using our long-range sensors and intelligence assets. Every attempt has failed. Human colony worlds that used to broadcast standard navigation signals are now silent. Their communication networks are invisible to our scanners. Ships that approach the human border are warned away by automated messages, but we never see the ships sending those messages. It is as if humanity has erected a wall around their entire civilization, and we cannot see through it. A Keltheran delegate named Vorsan stood up and asked the obvious question. What about our agents inside human space? Kexlan looked uncomfortable. We had 17 intelligence operatives in human territory when they withdrew. All of them were quietly arrested and returned to us at the border. They were not harmed, but they were given a clear message. Humanity knows we were watching them and they do not appreciate it. The economic impact came next, delivered by a Sendari trade minister named Pelthar, who looked like he had not slept in days. The numbers he presented were devastating. Human manufacturers had supplied critical components for fusion reactors that powered everything from starships to planetary power grids. Without those components, prices had tripled and quality had dropped by half. Human medical technology, especially their nano repair systems, had become standard across council hospitals. Now those hospitals were rationing treatments and searching desperately for alternatives. The Sendari minister pulled up a chart showing trade volume over the past year. The drop was a cliff straight down. We have lost 38% of our trade capacity, he said. Entire economic sectors are collapsing because they depended on human intermediaries. Species that refuse to trade directly with each other because of old rivalries now have no choice, and they are choosing to simply not trade at all. But the worst news came from Dr. Yelmora, a Keltheran scientist who had worked in the Council's central research facility for 40 years. She was old even by Keltheran standards, and her crystalline skin had begun to cloud with age. She stood slowly and addressed the chamber with a voice that shook slightly. I have been reviewing our research records for the past 3 decades. What I found disturbs me greatly. She activated her own display, showing a timeline of scientific breakthroughs achieved by Council research programs. In the last 30 years, we have made significant advances in quantum computing, medical technology, materials science, and energy systems. We took credit for these advances as Council achievements. She paused and highlighted certain entries. 17 of our most important breakthroughs originated from human researchers. They were working in our facilities, participating in our programs, and their innovations drove our progress forward. We assumed they were simply contributing to Council science. But I have reviewed the original research notes. The humans were not contributing. They were leading. The chamber went silent. Dr. Yelmora continued with visible effort. The humans have a way of thinking that is different from ours. They make intuitive leaps that our scientists would never consider. They combine unrelated fields in ways that seem illogical until they work. They question assumptions that we accepted as fundamental truths. And we took their innovations, put Council names on them, and told ourselves that we were helping primitive humans learn from superior civilizations. The truth is the opposite. They were advancing us and we were too arrogant to see it. Meanwhile, on the edge of human space, a border patrol officer named Carl Henderson sat in his small station monitoring the sensors that watched the boundary between human and Council territory. It was boring work most days, but today his screen suddenly lit up with energy signatures unlike anything he had seen before. The readings came from deep inside human space, from systems that had been quiet since the withdrawal. Carl ran the signatures through his database and found nothing that matched. Whatever humans were doing behind their wall, they were using technology that did not exist in any Council records. He filed his report and wondered what humanity had been building during these 6 months of silence. Back in Council space, Speaker Vexthor dismissed the emergency session and returned to his private office. He stood before a window that looked out over the Council homeworld and felt something he had not experienced in decades. Fear. Not the fear of immediate danger, but something deeper and more troubling. For 4,000 years, the Council had maintained order in their region of space. They had rules, traditions, and a clear hierarchy of power. Species joined the Council, learned their place, and contributed according to their abilities. Humanity had disrupted that order by refusing to accept their assigned role. Now they were out there somewhere, silent and hidden, doing things the Council could not observe or control. Vexthor had dismissed humans as primitives who needed guidance. He had supported the restrictions and limitations placed on their expansion. He had voted to keep them small and manageable. Now he stood at his window and wondered if he had made the greatest mistake of his long life. Somewhere beyond the borders of Council space, humanity was free to do whatever they wanted, and the Council would not know what was coming until it was too late. 2 years had passed since humanity closed their borders, and Captain Felthar of the Sindari merchant vessel Golden Dawn was having the worst day of his career. His ship's main fusion reactor had just suffered a catastrophic failure, and he was drifting in space at the very edge of what used to be a busy trade route. The route bordered human territory, which meant Council ships avoided it now. Felthar had taken the risk because it cut 3 weeks off his journey time, and now he was paying the price for that decision. His engineer had already told him the reactor was beyond field repair. Without power, life support would fail in 18 hours. Felthar sent out a distress call knowing that no one would likely hear it in time. He sat in his captain's chair and thought about his family back on the Sindari homeworld. He had been a merchant for 30 years and he never imagined it would end like this. Then his sensors picked up a ship approaching at high speed. Felthar felt a surge of hope until he saw the identification signature. It was a human vessel, the UES Endeavor. His hope turned to confusion. Humans had closed their borders and cut all contact with Council species. Every ship that approached human space was turned away with automated warnings. But here was a human ship responding to his distress call. The communication channel opened, and a human woman's face appeared on his screen. "This is Captain Jennifer Cole of the UES Endeavor. We received your distress signal." "What is your situation?" Felthar explained about the reactor failure and his dwindling life support. Captain Cole nodded and said her ship would be there in 20 minutes. She closed the channel before Felthar could even thank her. The Endeavor arrived exactly 20 minutes later, and Felthar got his first look at the new generation of human ships. It was nothing like the vessels he remembered from 2 years ago. The design was sleek and elegant, with lines that suggested both speed and power. The hull material seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, giving the ship an almost ethereal quality. The Endeavor moved with a precision that Felthar had never seen before, sliding into position beside the Golden Dawn like a dancer completing a practiced move. Docking clamps extended and locked onto his ship with gentle efficiency. Captain Cole contacted him again and said her engineering team would stabilize his life support and then tow his ship to the nearest station for repairs. Felthar asked if that station was in Council space. Cole smiled slightly and said it was a human station, but he was welcome there under emergency protocols. The journey to the station took 6 hours, and Felthar spent most of that time staring out his viewport at the human ship towing him. He had spent decades traveling Council space and had seen vessels from dozens of species. The Endeavor was different. Everything about it spoke of advancement beyond what the Council possessed. When they finally arrived at the station, Felthar's confusion turned to shock. The station was massive, easily twice the size of the largest Council stations he had seen. It hung in space like a small moon, with docking arms extending in perfect geometric patterns. Ships moved around it in coordinated streams, and every one of them had the same sleek design as the Endeavor. This was not a frontier outpost. This was a major hub of activity, and it had been built in just 2 years. Captain Cole personally escorted Felthar to meet the station commander, a human man named Greg Phillips, who greeted him warmly. Phillips explained that the engineering team would have the Golden Dawn's reactor replaced within 2 days. Replaced, not repaired. Felthar asked how much this would cost, expecting a price that would bankrupt him. Phillips waved the question away and said there was no charge for emergency assistance. It was simply the right thing to do. Felthar was given guest quarters and told he could move freely around the public areas of the station. He spent the next 2 days exploring, and everything he saw amazed him. The technology was decades beyond Council standards. The materials used in construction were stronger and lighter than anything he recognized. The computer systems responded to commands almost before they were spoken. Human crew members moved with purpose and confidence, working with an efficiency that seemed almost mechanical, but was clearly the result of excellent training. On his second day, Felthar stood in an observation deck looking out at the ships coming and going. Commander Phillips found him there and stood beside him quietly for a moment. Finally, Felthar said what he had been thinking since he arrived. "You have been busy." Phillips smiled and replied with simple honesty. "We have been free. Turns out when you are not spending half your time justifying your existence to people who do not respect you, you can focus on progress." Felthar thought about those words and felt a deep shame. He had been one of the delegates who abstained from the vote that drove humans away. He had not opposed the restrictions, but he had not supported humanity either. He had stayed neutral and told himself that was enough. Now he saw the cost of his neutrality. On the third day, the Golden Dawn was ready to depart with a brand new reactor that was better than the original. Felthar met with Commander Phillips one last time and asked if he could tell the council what he had seen. Phillips considered the question and then nodded. You can tell them whatever you want. But make sure you also tell them this. Humanity bears no ill will toward the council. We are not seeking revenge or conflict. But the door is closed. We have moved on, and we have no intention of coming back. You and your people are welcome to trade at our border stations if you wish, but you will never again have access to our space or our technology. We spent 30 years trying to be part of your civilization. Now we are building our own. Felthar left the station with those words echoing in his mind. His journey back to council space took 3 weeks, and he spent every day of it writing his report. When his report reached the council, it caused an immediate crisis. Intelligence Director Kexlan had it verified by every means available. Independent observers were sent to confirm what Felthar had seen. They all came back with the same message. Humanity had not just advanced, they had leaped forward in ways that seemed impossible. Technology that should have taken decades to develop had been created in 2 years. Ships that outperformed the best council vessels by significant margins. Stations that dwarfed council construction projects. And all of it hidden behind the wall humanity had erected around their space. The Vraxian Empire, which prided itself on having the strongest military in council space, began running strategic assessments. The results were disturbing. If humanity's civilian technology had advanced this far, what had their military technology become? The Vraxians had always dismissed humans as primitive warriors with crude weapons. Now they faced the possibility that humanity possessed capabilities that could challenge even the mighty Vraxian fleet. In the council chambers, delegates who had voted for the restrictions 2 years ago now wondered if they had created something far more dangerous than a subordinate species. They had created a rival. The crisis came from a direction no one in the council had been watching. The Krell Dominion had been a threat on the borders of council space for over a century, launching raids and probing attacks that tested council defenses. They were a brutal empire that respected only strength, and for decades the combined might of council fleets had kept them contained. But the council was fracturing. Old alliances were breaking down without human intermediaries to smooth over disputes. Economic troubles made military funding difficult. Species that had cooperated for generations were now arguing over resources and territory. The Krell sensed weakness, and they attacked with everything they had. The invasion fleet was the largest the Krell had ever assembled. 300 warships crossed into council space and struck at the Belteric system, a major trade hub that connected a dozen different species' territories. Council forces scrambled to respond, pulling ships from across their space to meet the threat. Admiral Zektar of the Vraxian fleet took command of the defense, leading a combined force of 200 vessels from 8 different species. On paper, it should have been enough. The Council had superior numbers in some ship classes and better technology in others. But paper did not account for the reality of a fractured alliance trying to fight as a unified force. The battle began badly and got worse. Keltharan ships used formation tactics that required precise coordination, but the Sendari vessels could not match their maneuvering speeds. Vraxian heavy cruisers expected support from Felorian carriers, but the carriers held back to protect their own retreat routes. Communications were a mess, with translation delays causing orders to arrive seconds too late. The Krell fleet tore into the Council forces with savage efficiency, focusing fire on isolated ships and exploiting every gap in the defensive formations. Within 3 hours, the Council had lost 40 vessels. Within 6 hours, they were in full retreat. Admiral Zektar watched his fleet fall apart and felt a rage mixed with despair. This would not have happened if the humans were still here, he thought. They had always been the glue that held joint operations together, translating not just words but intentions, smoothing over cultural differences, and finding ways to make different species work as one. Now that glue was gone. The Krell pressed their advantage, pursuing the retreating Council forces toward the core worlds. Panic spread through Council space. If the Krell broke through, millions would die. Speaker Vexthor called an emergency session, and faced a chamber full of terrified delegates demanding solutions he did not have. The military situation was desperate. The political situation was worse. And then someone suggested the unthinkable: contact the humans. Ask for help. Vexthor looked around the chamber and saw the same thought on many faces. They had driven humanity away with restrictions and condescension. They had dismissed human capabilities and blocked human growth. Now they wanted to beg for human assistance. The shame of it burned, but the alternative was extinction. Vexthor personally opened the communication channel that had been silent for over 2 years. The connection took several minutes to establish, and when it finally opened, a human face appeared on the screen. Admiral Stephen Blake, commander of Earth's home fleet, looked at Vexthor with an expression that showed neither hostility nor warmth. Just professional distance. Speaker Vexthor. His voice was calm and measured. "What can I do for you?" Vexthor explained the situation quickly, describing the Krell invasion and the collapse of Council defenses. He invoked the mutual defense protocols that humanity had signed 30 years ago when they first joined the Council. Admiral Blake listened without interrupting, and when Vexthor finished, he was quiet for a long moment before responding. "Speaker, humanity withdrew from the Council 2 years ago. When we left, we terminated all treaties and agreements, including mutual defense protocols. We have no legal obligation to assist you." Vexthor felt his crystalline skin flush with desperation. "But the Krell will not stop with us. If they conquer Council space, they will turn toward human territory next. Surely you see that helping us is in your own interest." Blake nodded slightly. "Perhaps. But that is our problem to solve, not yours. We will defend our borders if and when the Krell come for us. What happens to Council space is your concern, not ours." The words were spoken without anger or satisfaction, just simple statement of fact. Vexthor tried to argue, offering technology sharing and trade agreements and political concessions. Blake listened politely and then said that humanity was not interested in returning to the Council under any circumstances. The conversation ended and Vexthor was left staring at a blank screen. 3 days later, the Krell fleet approached the Meridian system, another major Council hub. Council forces had managed to assemble a last defensive line, but everyone knew it would not hold. The mood was grim. Captains sent final messages to their families. Soldiers checked their weapons with the certainty that they would not survive the day. And then, without warning, massive energy signatures appeared on long-range sensors. 20 human warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel and took up positions between the Council fleet and the Krell advance. But they were not there to save the Council. They were establishing a defensive perimeter around a cluster of asteroids that contained human mining operations. Operations that had been established years ago and never abandoned. The human ships ignored the Council fleet entirely, their weapons and shields oriented toward the Krell. The Krell commanders saw 20 human ships and made a fatal assumption. They were used to Council vessels that could be overwhelmed with superior numbers. They diverted a squadron of 40 ships to destroy the human position and clear their flank. It was the worst mistake they ever made. The human warships opened fire, and the universe seemed to tear apart. Weapons that had never been seen before cut through Krell shields like they were not there. Beams of coherent energy turned warships into vapor. Missiles moved with impossible speed and struck with devastating accuracy. The human ships themselves moved like living things, dodging return fire with maneuvers that should have torn them apart from the G-forces, but somehow did not. In 17 minutes, 40 Krell warships were reduced to expanding clouds of debris. Not one human ship showed even minor damage. The remaining Krell fleet saw what had happened to their squadron and made the only logical decision. They turned and ran. The entire invasion force, over 200 ships that had been crushing Council forces for days, retreated at maximum speed back toward their own territory. They did not stop until they were 3 systems away. The Council fleet, which had been preparing for a desperate last stand, suddenly found themselves facing empty space. Admiral Zektar stared at his sensors in disbelief. The humans had destroyed a Krell squadron in less than 20 minutes and scared off the entire invasion fleet, and they had done it almost casually, as if it required no real effort. Admiral Blake opened a communication channel to the Council fleet, and his face appeared on screens across dozens of ships. "We have secured our mining operations and established a defensive perimeter around human assets in this region. The Krell will not threaten our interests again. What you do with your borders is your concern. Humanity is no longer interested in council politics or council problems. We have our own future to build. Good luck with yours." The transmission ended, and the human warships jumped back into faster-than-light travel, vanishing as quickly as they had appeared. On Earth, Daniel Harper stood in his new office as Secretary of Exploration, looking at a holographic star map that showed humanity's expanding frontier. President Carter entered and stood beside him, reviewing reports of first contact with 6 new species, all of them far from Council space. These species had never heard of the Galactic Council and had no preconceptions about humanity's place in the galaxy. They met humans as equals, and the relationships being built were based on mutual respect rather than hierarchy. Carter asked if Daniel thought the Council would learn from what had happened. Daniel considered the question and shrugged. "Some will. The ones who always respected us will probably reach out eventually, and we might talk to them. The others will keep their arrogance until it destroys them. Either way, it is not our problem anymore. They can keep their table and their rules and their hierarchy. We have built our own path." In the council chambers, Speaker Vexthor sat alone long after the other delegates had left. He stared at the empty section where human representatives had once sat, and he finally understood the magnitude of what the council had lost. Humanity had not needed the council's permission to thrive. They had not needed council technology or council guidance or council approval. They had needed only to be left alone to reach their full potential. The council had spent 30 years trying to control humanity, to keep them small and manageable and dependent. Now humanity was free, and they had become something far greater than the council had ever imagined possible. The fear that gripped Vexthor was not that humanity would seek revenge. It was something far worse. It was the certainty that humanity no longer cared whether the council existed at all. They had moved on, and they had left the council behind.